19 black gay celebrities who died tragically from illness. They were celebrated as icons, applauded for their talent, and placed on the highest stages of history. But when illness arrived, many were left to face it in silence. Behind the music, the laughter, and the applause were black queer lives shaped by fear, secrecy, and resilience. This is not just a tribute, it is a reckoning. How many legends were forced to hide who they were just to survive? And what did that cost them in the end? Stay with us as we uncover stories the spotlight never wanted to show. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and join the conversation in the comments. This is Black Excellence Legends. Little Richard. Little Richard was not simply a performer. He was the spark that set modern music on fire. Born Richard Wayne Penniman in 1932 in Macon, Georgia, he rose from poverty and racial segregation to become one of the founding architects of rock and roll. His explosive hits, Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, and Good Golly Miss Molly, did more than entertain. They reshaped rhythm, performance, and freedom itself, influencing artists from Elvis Presley to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. On stage, Little Richard was unstoppable. His soaring voice, pounding piano, and flamboyant style challenged every boundary of race, gender expression, and sound. Yet away from the spotlight, his life was defined by conflict. As a gay man raised in a deeply religious environment, he spent decades torn between faith and identity. At a time when queerness was condemned, he oscillated between self-acceptance and denial, often retreating from music under spiritual guilt. Despite these inner battles, his legacy continued to grow. By the 1980s and 1990s, he was widely recognized as a pioneer, receiving numerous Lifetime Achievement Awards and formal acknowledgement for shaping popular music. In later years, Richard spoke more openly about his struggles, acknowledging the cost of living under constant judgment while carrying the weight of cultural expectation. In his final years, illness replaced applause. Little Richard battled bone cancer, which gradually weakened his once electric body. On May 9, 2020, he passed away at the age of 87. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his influence. Little Richard's story is not only about sound and spectacle, it is about survival, contradiction, and resilience. He gave the world joy while carrying private pain, proving that greatness often comes at a price history rarely sees, but must never forget. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross possessed a voice that felt like comfort itself. Born in 1951 in New York City, he rose from backing vocals in advertising jingles to become one of the most successful R&B singers of all time. With albums like Never Too Much, Give Me the Reason, and Power of Love, Luther sold over 40 million records worldwide and earned 8 Grammy Awards. His music defined romance for an entire generation. Yet behind the flawless delivery and elegant stage presence was a deeply private man. In an era when the music industry demanded carefully controlled images, Luther guarded his personal life fiercely. Though widely understood by those close to him, his sexuality was never publicly confirmed during his lifetime. For a black male artist at the height of fame, the risk of honesty felt too high. Silence became the price of success. As the years passed, the pressure took a toll. Luther struggled with diabetes and fluctuating weight, conditions that quietly strained his health. In April 2003, he suffered a severe stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to sing as he once had. For a man whose identity was built on voice, the loss was devastating. On July 1, 2005, Luther Vandross died at the age of 54 due to complications related to the stroke. The world mourned the loss of a singer who had given so much tenderness to others. Yet his tragedy was not simply illness. It was a life lived without the freedom to fully love openly. Luther's legacy endures in the songs that still play at weddings, anniversaries, and quiet evenings at home. He taught the world how love should sound, even if he was never allowed to sing entirely for himself. Sylvester James Jr. was a force of nature. Born in 1947 in Los Angeles, he rose from gospel roots in experimental theater to become one of disco's most unforgettable voices. With his soaring falsetto and fearless self-expression, Sylvester transformed dance music into a declaration of identity. Songs like "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" were not just hits, they were affirmations. Unlike many of his peers, Sylvester refused to hide. He embraced femininity, flamboyance, and queerness at a time when doing so invited ridicule and danger. On stage, he embodied joy and liberation. Offstage, he faced constant judgment. Still, he chose authenticity over approval, even as musical trends shifted and disco faded from mainstream favor. In 1986, Sylvester was diagnosed with HIV. At a moment when AIDS was devastating the LGBTQ+ community and fear dominated public conversation, he did not retreat. He continued recording and performing, determined that illness would not erase his voice. His final album, Immortal, carried the weight of farewell without surrender. As his health declined, Sylvester made a deliberate choice to leave the hospital and spend his final days at home, surrounded by friends rather than machines. On December 16, 1988, he died at the age of 41 from AIDS-related complications. Sylvester's life was brief, but his impact was vast. He proved that music could be both celebration and resistance. Long after disco's lights dimmed, his voice remained bold, unapologetic, and forever mighty real. Nell Carter. Nell Carter was a woman whose voice could fill a room with warmth. Born in 1948 in Birmingham, Alabama, she rose from a difficult childhood marked by poverty and trauma to become a celebrated star of Broadway and American television. Her performance in Ain't Misbehavin' earned her a Tony Award, and millions later welcomed her into their homes through the hit sitcom Gimme a Break. On stage and on screen, Nell radiated joy. Her laughter felt genuine, her smile disarming. Yet behind that brightness lived a woman navigating a world that demanded perfection and conformity. Nell was a lesbian at a time when Hollywood offered little safety for women who loved other women, especially Black women. To protect her career, she chose privacy, even entering a brief marriage that could not hide her truth. The weight of secrecy was heavy. Alongside emotional strain, Nell battled diabetes for many years. Long hours, stress, and the pressure to maintain an image slowly weakened her health. In the early 2000s, complications from the disease led to repeated hospitalizations. In January 2003, Nell Carter passed away at the age of 54 due to complications related to diabetes. Her death shocked fans who had grown up with her presence, unaware of the quiet battles she had endured. Nell Carter's legacy is one of resilience. She made people laugh, sing, and feel seen, while rarely being fully seen herself. Her story reminds us that behind every radiant performer may live a private truth, and that courage sometimes exists not in loud declarations, but in survival itself. Jackie Moms Mabley. Jackie Moms Mabley was a revolutionary disguised as a grandmother. Born Loretta Mary Aiken in 1894, she entered comedy at a time when Black women were rarely given a microphone, let alone control over the room. With her toothless grin, house dress, and sharp wit, Moms disarmed audiences before delivering jokes that challenged racism, sexism, and injustice head-on. Behind the humor was a woman who lived boldly in private. Moms was a lesbian in an era when such truth could end a career, or worse. She loved women openly within trusted circles, yet understood the danger of public acknowledgement. Comedy became her shield, allowing her to speak truths others feared, even as she guarded her own. Moms Mabley worked relentlessly for decades, performing on the Chitlin circuit and eventually making history at Carnegie Hall. Her success came late in life, but when it arrived, it was undeniable. Still, the years of constant touring and physical strain took their toll. In the early 1970s, heart disease weakened her body. Even then, moms refused to stop performing. She took the stage until her strength failed, believing laughter was her purpose. On May 23, 1975, Jackie "Moms" Mabley died at the age of 81 from heart failure. Her legacy lives on not only in comedy, but in courage. Moms Mabley proved that humor could be resistance, and that even in a world unwilling to accept her fully, she would never stop telling the truth, one joke at a time. Alberta Hunter. Alberta Hunter carried the sound of the blues like a lifetime companion. Born in 1895 in Memphis, Tennessee, she rose from poverty to become one of the most respected voices in American music. Her career spanned jazz clubs, Broadway stages, and international tours, with songs that captured longing, survival, and quiet strength. By the 1920s, she was among the highest-paid Black performers in the country, yet success did not bring freedom. Alberta was a lesbian in an era when such truth could destroy a woman's livelihood. To survive, she concealed her relationships, even as her songs overflowed with emotional honesty. Love for Alberta existed behind closed doors, while the stage became the only place she could fully breathe. As years passed, the exhaustion of hiding took its toll. In 1957, Alberta shocked the world by retiring from music entirely, reinventing herself as a nurse. For 2 decades, she lived a quieter life, caring for others while suppressing her own creative voice. In the 1970s, in her late 70s, Alberta returned to music. Her voice had softened, but its depth had only grown richer. Audiences listened in reverent silence as she sang with the wisdom of a woman who had lived fully, even if not freely. Alberta Hunter died in 1984 at the age of 89 from complications related to leukemia. Her legacy is not only musical excellence, but endurance. She proved that even when love must remain hidden, truth can still live in every note sung. Gladys Bentley. Gladys Bentley refused to fit into the world she was given. Born in 1907 in Philadelphia, she became one of the most daring performers of the Harlem Renaissance. Dressed in tailored suits and top hats, Bentley sang blues songs that openly referenced same-sex desire, commanding stages with humor, confidence, and a deep, resonant voice. In the 1920s and 1930s, she was a star of Harlem nightlife, performing at clubs like the Ubangi Club, while boldly defying gender and sexual norms. Audiences were captivated, but society was not forgiving. Police harassment, censorship, and moral crackdowns followed her everywhere. Still, Gladys continued, because silence was never an option. As political and social pressure intensified in the 1950s, Bentley's career suffered. In an attempt to survive, she publicly claimed to have abandoned her lesbian identity and began wearing dresses. The change did not bring peace. The suppression of self weighed heavily on her health and spirit. By the end of the decade, illness overtook her. Chronic pneumonia weakened her body, and opportunities disappeared. On January 18, 1960, Gladys Bentley died at the age of 52. Her story is one of fearless authenticity and its cost. Gladys Bentley lived ahead of her time, daring to exist openly when the world was not ready. Today, she stands as a symbol of resistance, reminding us that visibility itself can be revolutionary, even when it demands everything in return. Billy Preston. Billy Preston was a rare gift. Born in 1946 in Houston, Texas, he was a child prodigy whose talent was evident before he reached his teenage years. By the age of 10, he was performing gospel music alongside legends, and as an adult, he became one of the most respected keyboardists in popular music. His work with artists like the Beatles earned him the nickname the Fifth Beatle, while solo hits such as Nothing from Nothing showcased his joy-filled musical spirit. Despite his success, Billy lived much of his life divided. The music industry of his era left little room for openness, especially for Black men who were gay. For years, Billy concealed his identity, carrying the weight of secrecy alongside the demands of fame. As pressure mounted, he turned to drugs, a struggle that nearly derailed his career and health. In the early 1990s, Billy made a turning point. He publicly came out as gay, entered recovery, and returned to gospel music with renewed faith. Friends noted that this period brought him a sense of peace he had long been denied. Yet his body had already suffered years of strain. Chronic kidney disease gradually weakened him, limiting his ability to perform. Billy Preston died in June 2006 at the age of 59 from kidney failure. His passing marked the loss of a musician whose joy had touched millions, even while his own journey towards self-acceptance was painfully delayed. Billy's legacy lives in the melodies that still uplift listeners. His life reminds us that talent can open doors, but freedom comes only when one is finally allowed to live truthfully. Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles did more than create music. He created a home. Born in 1955 in New York City, Frankie became known as the godfather of house music, shaping a genre that transformed dance floors into spaces of belonging. In Chicago clubs during the late 1970s and 1980s, his sound blended soul, disco, and electronic rhythm, giving rise to a global movement rooted in unity and release. For many in the Black LGBTQ+ community, Frankie's music was refuge. While society outside remained hostile, the dance floor offered safety, connection, and joy. Frankie himself lived quietly, letting the music speak when words felt risky. As the AIDS crisis devastated his community, he lost countless friends, pouring grief and resilience into his work. Frankie later came out openly, continuing to perform despite declining health. In the early 2000s, he developed diabetes, which led to severe complications, including the loss of part of his foot. Still, he refused to stop creating. Even in pain, he traveled, DJ'd, and mentored younger artists, believing music was his purpose. On March 31, 2014, Frankie Knuckles died at the age of 59 due to complications from diabetes. His death was mourned worldwide, not only by fans, but by communities who had found freedom through his sound. Frankie's legacy beats on in every house track played today. He proved that music could heal, unite, and protect, and that sometimes the truest form of activism begins with a rhythm. Wilmer, Little Axe, Broadnax. Wilmer, Little Axe Broadnax possessed a voice that seemed to rise straight from the soul. Born in 1916 in Houston, Texas, he became one of the defining tenors of gospel music's golden age. As a member of the Spirit of Memphis Quartet, Broadnax helped shape a sound that carried faith, sorrow, and hope to Black congregations across America during the 1940s and 1950s. On stage, his singing was powerful and unwavering, a voice of devotion that moved audiences deeply. Yet behind the sacred harmonies, Wilmer lived with a truth he could never fully reveal. He was both gay and transgender in a religious world that allowed no space for such identities. The fear of rejection was constant, and silence became the price of belonging. Despite internal conflict, Broadnax remained devoted to his music. He continued performing and recording long after gospel's commercial peak, choosing faith over fame. In later years, as social attitudes shifted slightly, he lived more openly within private circles, though public acceptance remained distant. In the early 1990s, Broadnax's health declined. Lung cancer slowly weakened his body, making each breath more difficult. Even then, those close to him recalled his calm spirit and quiet dignity. On August 18, 1992, Wilmer Little Axe Broadnax died at the age of 75. His legacy is one of profound contradiction and courage. He gave his voice to God while hiding essential parts of himself from the world. Today, Broadnax stands as a reminder that many pioneers carried unseen burdens, and that faith for some was both refuge and restraint. J.D. Steele. J.D. Steele was a man whose life revolved around harmony, musical and spiritual. Born in 1960, Steele became a respected figure in the Midwest gospel community, particularly in Minnesota, where his voice and leadership shaped choirs and inspired countless worshipers. His singing carried warmth, control, and a sense of reverence that filled churches and concert halls alike. Yet beyond the pulpit and performance, Steele lived with quiet isolation. As a gay man within deeply religious spaces, he understood the cost of honesty. Acceptance often came with conditions, and Steele chose discretion, focusing his energy on music rather than conflict. His faith sustained him, even as it demanded restraint. As years passed, Steele continued directing choirs, mentoring young singers, and writing music rooted in hope. He believed gospel was not only about praise, but about survival. In private, he navigated the emotional toll of living between devotion and self-denial. In the late 2000s, Steele's health began to fail. Heart disease gradually weakened him, limiting his strength but not his spirit. Even during hospital stays, friends recalled him speaking about music, faith, and the importance of compassion within religious communities. In 2021, J.D. Steele died at the age of 61 from heart failure. His passing was deeply felt among those who knew his work, though his struggles remained largely invisible to the public. Steele's legacy is one of quiet perseverance. He served his community faithfully, even when that same community struggled to fully embrace him. His life asks a difficult question. How many voices have uplifted others while never being allowed to sing freely for themselves? Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters was a woman who carried history on her shoulders. Born in 1896 in Chester, Pennsylvania, she rose from an extremely difficult childhood marked by poverty and trauma to become one of the most important figures in American entertainment. She was the first Black woman to star on Broadway and the first to receive an Academy Award nomination for dramatic acting, breaking barriers that had long excluded Black women from serious roles. Her voice moved effortlessly between blues, jazz, and gospel, capturing sorrow and resilience in equal measure. During the Harlem Renaissance, Ethel became a symbol of sophistication and strength, performing in clubs, theaters, and eventually Hollywood films. To the public, she was elegance and dignity personified. Yet behind that success lived a private truth. Ethel was a lesbian in a time when such an identity could destroy a career. Her deepest relationships were kept out of sight, her love carefully guarded to ensure survival in a hostile world. The cost of that secrecy followed her throughout her life. As she aged, illness began to replace applause. In her later years, uterine cancer weakened her body, gradually pulling her away from the stage she had fought so hard to reach. On September 1st, 1977, Ethel Waters died at the age of 80. Her legacy endures far beyond her performances. Ethel Waters did not simply open doors. She forced them open and stood firmly in the doorway. She sang for a future she would never fully live to see, proving that courage sometimes means enduring silence so others may someday speak freely. Howard Rollins Jr. Howard Rollins Jr. was an actor of rare intensity. Born in 1950 in Baltimore, Maryland, he emerged in the 1970s as one of the most promising performers of his generation. His breakthrough role in Ragtime earned him an Academy Award nomination, and his work on television, particularly in the heat of the night, made him a familiar and respected presence in American homes. On screen, Rollins conveyed depth, vulnerability, and emotional complexity. He possessed the ability to command attention without spectacle, drawing audiences into characters shaped by conflict and humanity. Yet behind the camera, his life was far less stable. Rollins lived in an industry that offered little protection for Black gay men. To safeguard his career, he kept his sexuality private, navigating constant pressure and scrutiny. Personal struggles, including substance abuse, further complicated his path, gradually eroding professional opportunities. In the early 1990s, Rollins was diagnosed with AIDS. As the disease progressed, his health declined rapidly. Still, he continued working when possible, refusing to surrender entirely to illness. By late 1996, complications had overwhelmed his body. Howard Rollins Jr. died on December 8, 1996, at the age of 46. His passing marked the quiet end of a career that once promised longevity and influence. Rollins's story is one of brilliance constrained by circumstance. He represents a generation of artists lost too soon, not for lack of talent, but because the world they lived in offered little room for truth, healing, or mercy. Tamara Dobson. Tamara Dobson entered American cinema like a force of nature. Born in 1947 in Baltimore, Maryland, she stood nearly 6 feet tall, elegant and commanding, at a time when Black women were rarely allowed to embody power on screen. Her breakout role as Cleopatra Jones in the early 1970s made her an icon of the blaxploitation era, a heroine who was intelligent, fearless, and unapologetically strong. Audiences saw confidence in control. What they did not see was the careful restraint required to maintain that image. Tamara was a lesbian in an industry that offered little tolerance for women who challenged both gender roles and sexual norms. To protect her career, she kept her private life out of public view, carrying the weight of invisibility even as she symbolized empowerment for others. As Hollywood shifted, opportunities narrowed. Tamara gradually stepped away from the spotlight, choosing privacy over reinvention. In the early 2000s, illness entered her life quietly. Lung cancer weakened her body, forcing her into seclusion as treatment and fatigue replaced public appearances. On October 2, 2006, Tamara Dobson died at the age of 59. Her passing was marked by reflection rather than spectacle, as fans revisited the impact she had made during a brief but powerful career. Tamara's legacy lies in representation. She showed that Black women could lead, command, and protect without apology. Though her personal truth remained largely unseen, her image reshaped what strength looked like on screen, and that influence continues long after the credits fade. Sterling St. Jacques. Sterling St. Jacques embodied the energy of an era defined by excess, freedom, and self-expression. Born in 1957 in New York City, he emerged in the late 1970s as one of the first openly gay Black male models to break into mainstream fashion. With his striking looks and magnetic presence, Sterling became a fixture of the Studio 54 scene, representing a moment when style and identity collided under flashing lights. He moved effortlessly between fashion, film, and nightlife, appearing in projects like Eyes of Laura Mars, while gracing magazine pages that rarely featured men who looked like him. Sterling lived openly and authentically, embracing visibility even when it carried risk. In an era still hostile to queer Black men, that visibility was itself an act of courage. Behind the glamour, however, life moved quickly and unforgivingly. In the early 1980s, Sterling was diagnosed with liver cancer. The illness progressed rapidly, cutting short a life still unfolding. Even as his health declined, those who knew him recalled his determination to live fully, refusing to retreat into fear or regret. Sterling St. Jacques died in 1984 at just 26 years old. His death stunned a community that had barely begun to understand his significance. Though his time was brief, Sterling's impact was lasting. He challenged norms of beauty and masculinity, carving out space where none had existed. His story reminds us that some lives burn brightly not because they last long, but because they refuse to be dimmed at all. Sahara Davenport. Sahara Davenport was elegance in motion. Born Antoine Ashley in 1984 in Dallas, Texas, he was trained as a classical dancer before becoming widely known through RuPaul's Drag Race Season 2. Unlike many performers driven by spectacle, Sahara brought restraint, discipline, and quiet refinement to drag, blending ballet technique with high fashion and emotional control. On stage, Sahara radiated calm confidence. He did not shout for attention. He commanded it through precision. His performances reflected years of training and a deep respect for craft. For many viewers, he represented a different kind of drag, one rooted in grace rather than excess. Offstage, Sahara lived openly as a gay man, supported by chosen family and a growing community. Yet even with authenticity, life carried unseen weight. In the years following his rise to prominence, Sahara faced ongoing health challenges. Heart disease gradually weakened him, forcing hospitalizations that interrupted his career, but never his spirit. Friends recalled that even during illness, Sahara remained focused on performance and professionalism. In 2012, despite declining health, he continued rehearsing and planning appearances, unwilling to let sickness define his identity. On October 2, 2012, Sahara Davenport died at the age of 27 from heart failure. His death sent shockwaves through the drag and dance communities, not because of scandal, but because of promise lost far too soon. Sahara's legacy lives in the standard he set. He proved that drag could be elegant, disciplined, and deeply artistic. His life reminds us that brilliance does not always burn loudly, but it can still leave a lasting imprint long after the curtain falls. Essex Hemphill. Essex Hemphill wrote because silence was never an option. Born in 1957 in Chicago and raised in Washington, D.C., he emerged during the 1980s as one of the most important voices in Black queer literature. At a time when both racism and homophobia shaped public discourse, Hemphill used poetry as testimony, naming truths others refused to confront. His work addressed desire, loss, masculinity, and the lived reality of Black gay men with unflinching clarity. Collections like Ceremonies and Conditions did not seek comfort, they demanded recognition. On small stages and in crowded rooms, Hemphill spoke with urgency, transforming personal experience into collective memory. Hemphill lived openly as a gay man, a decision that placed him at the center of both artistic innovation and social risk. As the AIDS epidemic devastated his community, illness became impossible to ignore. Hemphill was diagnosed with HIV in the late 1980s, yet he refused retreat. Even as his health declined, he continued writing, performing, and advocating, believing visibility itself was an act of resistance. By the mid-1990s, complications from AIDS weakened his body. Support faded, and isolation grew. On November 4, 1995, Essex Hemphill died at the age of 38. His words did not die with him. Today, Hemphill is recognized as a foundational figure in Black LGBTQ+ thought. He proved that poetry could document history, challenge erasure, and preserve dignity. Essex Hemphill did not simply write about survival, he practiced it line by line until the very end. DeBarge. Bobby DeBarge sang like someone reaching for salvation. Born in 1956 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, he became the unmistakable falsetto of the R&B group Switch, a voice so tender it felt almost fragile. In the late 1970s, as Switch climbed the charts with hits like There'll Never Be and I Call Your Name, Bobby's sound stood out, pure, emotional, and unmistakably sincere. But behind the beauty of his voice lived a man in constant struggle. Bobby was openly gay within close circles, a rarity in the R&B world of his time, where masculinity and silence were often enforced. Alongside that truth came unresolved trauma and addiction. Drugs became both escape and burden, slowly unraveling the life that music had built. As the years passed, Bobby's health declined. In the early 1990s, he was diagnosed with HIV, at a moment when AIDS still carried devastating stigma and limited treatment options. Even as illness advanced, those close to him recalled that he continued to sing, softly, privately, holding on to the one thing that had always given him purpose. Bobby DeBarge died in 1995 at the age of 39 from AIDS-related complications. His death marked the quiet end of a voice that had once lifted countless listeners. Bobby's legacy is one of haunting beauty. His music endures as proof that vulnerability can be powerful, and that even lives marked by pain can leave behind moments of grace. He sang from the deepest places of the soul, and those echoes have never fully faded. Willie Smith. Willie Smith believed fashion should belong to everyone. Born in 1948 in Philadelphia, he rose to prominence in the late 1970s and 1980s as the founder of Willie Wear, a brand that redefined American style. His designs blended street culture, global influences, and accessibility long before inclusivity became an industry buzzword. At its peak, Willie Wear generated tens of millions of dollars annually, making Smith one of the most successful designers of his generation. Willie was not just creating clothes, he was creating space. As a Black gay man in a predominantly white, image-driven industry, he navigated success carefully. Though open within his artistic circles, he kept much of his personal life out of public view, understanding the risks of visibility during that era. As the AIDS epidemic spread through creative communities, Willie continued working relentlessly. In 1987, his health began to fail rapidly. Hospitalized in New York, he faced severe pneumonia, a common and often fatal complication of AIDS at the time. Willie Smith died on April 17, 1987, at the age of 39. The fashion world was stunned. Designers, artists, and collaborators mourned not only a friend, but a future that had been cut short. Willie's legacy lives on in modern fashion's emphasis on comfort, diversity, and cultural dialogue. He proved that style could be democratic, and that creativity, even when interrupted, can permanently reshape the world. His work continues to speak for a freedom he helped design. These stories leave us with difficult questions. Were these lives shortened only by illness, or by a world that demanded silence instead of compassion? If society had offered acceptance instead of judgment, how many of these legends might have lived longer, freer lives? Even today, are we truly listening, or have we simply learned to look away more politely? We want to hear from you. Which story moved you the most, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments and keep this conversation alive. Follow Black Excellence Legends, because remembering is not enough. Understanding is where change begins.